Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
CL 650, The Law Show is underway, and we're talking about immigration and citizenship, and we've talked about refugees earlier in the show. Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kisher are here from Maynard Kisher Stojkovic in Yaletown in downtown Vancouver, otherwise known as MKS. And before the break, we were talking about ETA, not estimated time of arrival, but electronic travel authorization. So, Gordon, you were talking a bit about how for countries that require, I guess there's certain countries that are exempt from having this electronic thing attached to your passport. And that's the main thing, it's attached to your passport. So what are the problems and what are the changes that have come about with ETA?
Well, the most interesting change right now is that the government is putting on the back burner, at least providing a grace period for 6 months. They haven't exactly said why that's going to be, but we've seen that there can be very big issues with this, and I'll just explain it to you. If you're a permanent resident of Canada, you don't need an ETA. It only applies to people who are coming here as visitors, and permanent residents are permanent residents.
Can you give me an example of a country there where you would need this? You're saying, if you're from the UK,
UK, Germany, Japan.
The U.S. is the only
U.S.
country
is exempt.
So our world is divided up between people who need visas and people who don't need visas. People that do need visas, imagine someone from India, somebody from China. They need a visa, so they got to go to an embassy first to apply to get a visa to come to Canada anyway.
That's the sticker that goes on your passport, right? I had that when I went to China.
Yeah,
right.
So it's a long, slow process.
Yeah.
So people that we trade a lot with have similar sort of income streams, similar values. Like Japan, for example, they can come to Canada, they get on the plane, they don't have to show anything but their passport when they get to the airport. We've now removed that ease of travel. We're saying to the Japanese guy, businessman, before you get on that plane, you're going to have to go on the computer and actually apply for this ETA.
So why is that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it's one more document as though we didn't have enough. I think they want to know everything. They want to monitor everybody that's coming into Canada, and this is a monitoring tool. But the problem that it's going to cause is with people who are already permanent residents in Canada. Rudy was talking earlier about the problem that these people have when it comes time to renew their PR card.
Yeah.
It's taking 6 months. It's taking a year. It's taking longer in some cases. And these people need their PR card when they try and get on an airplane to come back to Canada for travels, whether they're business travels or vacation. Now let's suppose somebody has applied for their new PR card, their old one's expired, now it's delayed, now they're abroad for business or travel. They used to be able to travel just on their passport. If you were a Japanese citizen, a permanent resident, if you were a German citizen, a permanent resident of Canada, you would just get on the plane as though you were a visitor. When you got to the border, you'd say, I'm a permanent resident, but you guys haven't given me my card. But now when those people go to hand in their passport to come here as a visitor, the airline's going to say, where's your ETA?
And would anybody even know that they need this?
Yes, because everybody who's from a visa-exempt country, if they're not a permanent resident, they need an ETA.
Except for
what I'm saying is, if I was one of the, if I am a permanent resident and I'm a German citizen that's a resident here in Canada, and I go to Germany, and would I even know that I need it?
You know that you needed your PR card.
You know you needed your PR card,
I see.
and that you don't have one.
Right.
But if you had consultation with friends, family, and whatever, you just say, look, just come back here as though you're a visitor. Don't use your PR card. Settle it up at the border when you get here. But now they need to say, now they need to have an ETA, and they can't get an ETA. So this is really marooning them. They have to go through a very difficult process, really relatively difficult, of applying for a special permanent resident travel document. It's an application that's really an enforcement application. It's being done at the consulate abroad. It's a terrible impediment. So I have my guess. That the delay in the ETAs is to help work out a way to make these rough edges go away, that they don't have those worked out yet. And the delays in the processing card is really creating an issue for it.
I mean, this is part of the process to push back where you deal with your problems, right? So when somebody arrives, self-select, so, for example, an English guy that has, for example, a DUI or driving under the influence, he's got a conviction, that may make him criminally inadmissible to come to Canada. So he's not allowed to come to Canada. The problem is we don't know he has that DUI, right? So he buys his ticket, he gets on the plane, and then he arrives at Vancouver Airport, and the officers, for some reason, ask him, do you have any criminal, they don't usually ask this, but they ask, do you have a criminal record? And the guy says, yes. Well, now they've got to deal with him. He's not allowed to come into Canada. They got to send him over to another room. They got to tie up an officer for probably 3 hours, ask him a bunch of questions, decide whether he's criminally admissible or not, then give him an option of applying for a special permit or sending him back. Eats up a lot of time. So the new process with the ETA, they're going to ask a bunch of questions. And the
so
question,
you'll be pre-cleared, kind of, right?
You'll get this pre-cleared clearance, and that guy will get a sorry. You have to go actually apply at the embassy and get this sorted out. So they're taking all that manpower that was used here and sorting it with a $7, like the fee is $7 to apply. It should take you 2 minutes. And now all these people that were coming to Canada that might have had criminal records or might have had problems with immigration before were able to get on the plane. Now they're going to be sorted out.
Yeah, I have issues with that because I always took the view that when somebody comes to Canada, although they might have a small criminal record in the background, the border wouldn't ask them. You know, how many times does a visitor go through the border and the guy at the border actually says, do you have criminal record? Not for visitors. They'll do it if you're picking up a work permit. You're going to be here for a duration of time. But they don't do it for ordinary visitors. I always thought that was very wise because you don't want to create a problem for every single traveler. You know, there's lots of people that got blemishes. Lots. Do you really want to have to deal with every one of those? Now they're going to force themselves to deal with it. If they ask that question in the ETA application, now you've made that person prohibited.
Peeling back an onion, right?
Well,
yeah.
But the U.S. has always done it, right? So the U.S. when you're flying in the United States, they ask you if you've been convicted. You have to fill out the card, right? Your customs declaration card that you fill out in the plane. Have you been convicted of a crime of moral turpitude? So there's this meeting going on right now with a quintet of countries, right? So there are 5 like-minded countries that we have, which is New Zealand, the United States being the major one, Australia, and the UK. So we share a lot of information, right? And the idea is to push us back to the same standard, right? So what's happening now is I think, they've decided amongst themselves is, well, why are we helping these criminals, maybe money laundering, maybe they've been convicted of fraud, allowing them to travel back and forth across our border? We're going to stop them before they even get on the plane.
What I'm surprised at is
Stopping everybody, though.
What I'm surprised at is there isn't more of this already. Like I fly to Europe or whatever, and I get to the airport and they scan my passport. You think they would be, this is the guy, and that doesn't exist?
They know very little. What's shocking to me is my clients come in and they've been living in Canada or working in Canada. They know I've left. Nobody knows you've left. So Canada has entry controls. When you come in, your passport is usually scanned and they keep a record of that. Canada has no idea of when you left. So you could come in and you leave the next day. Canada doesn't know if you've stayed, if you've overstayed. They do not automatically know that. It's the same in the U.S. It's a major problem.
Well, this was the story that happened in Vancouver, I believe, where you had to live in Vancouver for 2 or 3 years, the Chinese, and they called it the jail sentence.
The Canadian jail.
The Canadian jail. They would get the fraudulently stamped passports, and they would be back in China, and then they'd come in.
It's a little bit more nuanced. What they would do is they'd get 2 passports, right? So they'd have their one passport. They'd get it stamped that they arrived. They'd go and claim that they lost it. They didn't lose it. They'd go apply for a new Chinese passport and leave. And then they'd be gone for 5 years. And then when it came to apply, all of a sudden, they have the other passport.
It's like having 2 sets of books, one for taxes and one for yourself.
Yeah.
And they'd have 2 passports, one for travel and one for...
There was a lawyer involved in that got kicked out of the Law Society, I think.
Was he a lawyer?
He was a lawyer. He was a lawyer in Toronto. I think at a large firm, actually.
Well, I was thinking more of the consultant in Vancouver that recently got 7 years jail sentence.
There was a guy in Toronto that was doing it with a bunch of Chinese clients.
But you asked about getting your passport swiped and what shows up on it.
Yeah.
Well, that requires information sharing, right? Now,
so you're saying this group of 5 are going to share?
Yeah.
Well, they are, but it's going to be like there's a new agreement coming out with the States that is happening right now, and that's going to have exit sharing information. So if somebody leaves Canada and goes to the States, Canada will have access to that entry into the States information, and vice versa. Americans will be giving the Americans records of who's coming up here.
I find it interesting because if I go down to Point Roberts and I have a post box there and I send something there because I hate the brokerage fees the courier companies charge. So I go across the border. Where are you going? I'm going down to pick up a package, and I turn around 5 minutes later and I drive back across the Canadian side of the border. I think that they know I left one and came back and the other 5 minutes later.
No.
But you're telling me they don't know that?
They don't automatically know. What they have is they started information sharing less than the last 5 years, less than the last 4 years. They started information sharing on foreign nationals between U.S. and Canada. So if there was a Chinese person doing that,
or a French person,
we could get that information. They'd have to request it. It doesn't automatically show up on their screen. So it's a little bit more of an involved process, right? So they could request that information and see when you arrived in the States and see when you arrived in Canada and sort of piece that together. Now that this agreement is going, the next step is we're going to start, sharing information on our own nationals. So we're taking the Canadian, so a Canadian guy goes down there, we'll get that information from the U.S. on when that Canadian travels. So we're giving up that information.
I always thought that they knew that. They probably
most of my
Yeah. So how does this impact your firm, and what are clients coming to you for on this stuff?
If you have a client who's an employer, and that employer has a number of employees who are permanent residents or foreign workers, this ETA is a huge issue, because that company needs those people to be able to travel. The PR card issue has already caused problems for those companies. Their employees aren't free to travel, and travel is very integral to their business operations. Now you go and compound it by putting in an ETA requirement that doubly makes it tough for them to skirt around the problems with the delay in the PR card. So it's a huge issue.
Can you give me an example of somebody who would have this?
Sure. I had a fellow in the office the other day. He's an Indian citizen. He works for a company that has international operations. He's been here under a work permit. Now he's been selected for permanent residence. He's going to go down to the border and he's going to get his PR card. And he needs to travel next week. He needs to go overseas to Asia as a part of his business requirements. Well, he doesn't have his PR card when he gets landed. He doesn't have his PR card because it takes them at least 30 days to produce it. I think it's up to 60 now.
Days, 60 days now. That's the target.
So the company wants him to travel. Now, previously, he had an option that if he had to go traveling, as long as he could come back to the States and drive through the border, he would avoid having to show the non-existent PR card. He could drive up to the border, present his documents, say, I'm a permanent resident, let me in. Right? But he's looking at this, and we're talking about, well, what about ETA? Can you get a flight? This, that. Well, we don't know with the ETA. How soon is they talk? One of the things that the government was talking about is when he becomes a PR, they'll put a temporary ETA on his passport so that he can use that to fly with before the permanent resident card comes. And we think they're going to do that, but we're not certain.
Well, that's part of the conversation, talking about the changes with the government when it relates to things like the Citizenship Act, employer compliance, and a bunch more. And we're going to pick it all up when we are talking about immigration and citizenship. Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kisher are here joining me from MKS, and we'll continue the conversation next on The Law Show.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.